And start the recording. So now we're going to review just a little bit more about some topics, and then we'll jump into the topic for today. So I am going to go into my coding directory. So first I need to go into my desktop. And then inside my desktop, I need to go into my coding directory. In this case, I call it DPL Summer. Yours might be similar or different, so go ahead and do whatever you have. And then I'm actually going to create a new folder. And with this folder, I'm going to call it classes and modules. So classes and modules, and maybe even testing if we get to it. So I'll be calling it like that. And the thing about classes and modules is that usually you don't put a bunch of classes and modules all in one file. You actually have each class in their own file. And you'll start to see that when we jump into Rails. Essentially what Rails is a bunch of classes and modules together. So I'm going to cd into that class and module there, the directory, and then going to create a file called review. We'll be creating a lot of files inside of this folder, just because we'll be dealing with a lot of classes and modules. And then I'm going to go ahead and open this up. It's code space dot. There's a little indentation thing going on here. So there's a few things I want to review. And by looks of things, it looks like you got pretty much all the data types down, as well as some of the other things. But let's go into the topic that we covered last time, the last lecture, and that is arrays and hashes. And then we might even go into some variables as well. So with arrays, they are a collection of items, a collection of objects, and they're designated with this box bracket here, right? We'll do hello world. And if you want to grab an element from it, it'll be whatever you reference it as. In this case, I reference it as a local variable of R, and then box brackets, and then the position number. So the index number or the position number is 0 base. So it starts off by 0 and it goes on from there. So if I want world, it's actually index of 1. If I want to add anything to the array, like the quiz said, I just need to use a shovel method or the unshift method, and I can do that like that. So that is arrays. Let's go into some hashes. And with hashes, it's designated with curly brace, and it has key value pairs. It has name, Jill, age, 32, like that. And if you want to access one of these values, you would reference the hash itself, and it's box brackets and then colon the key name. So in this case, if I want the age, it will be age like that. And then let's go a little bit, let's combine this with your assignment. This might aid you if you are getting stuck at this point, is that if you want to have the user type in some of these elements, like let's say for now, the hash of name and age is not up to us, it's really up to the user, right? So what you could do is that you can default them to like a certain number. So it'll be a hash, and then whatever you need inside of that hash, so like name and age. And then if you want the user's input, like let's say you want them to update the name to be whatever the user's name is that you would grab the username like that. And then how do we get the user's input? What keyword do we use?
Get.
Yeah, it's gets.
Would you like do gets.chomp or something?
Yeah, you do gets.chomp or dot strip. Strip does it with both directions, so it does it before and after. Chomp does it at the end, I believe. So what this line does is that we are setting the name here to be whatever the user inputs. So that's one way you can get the user inputs into this hash, and then you can push this hash into the array using this here.
Would it always be single quotes for this circumstance? Like, could you also refer to it as like double quotes and still get the same result?
Yep. Oh, yes. Sorry, I fat fingered. Yep. Both of them works as well. It's just whatever is coming in, that has to match with what you are expecting it. So you might have to validate the user's input by doing like an if-else statement or something like that.
Why would you ever want to use single quotes since you can do more with the double quotes and you will always be right?
It's just use case, right? For example's sake, like this, since that one is already hard coded, like it's already there, you can just do a single quote. But if
Okay.
you have like punctuations or anything more dynamic, then you would use double quotes. That's a good question.
If you wanted to like restrict it to an integer or something like that, I mean, with the single strings, that would allow for a string, right? If it's a single quote.
Yeah, so let's say that we want to update age, right? And age technically is an integer. But again, if you just leave it like this will actually bring in the age as a string again. So it might not match up like you want it to. So you might have to do some validations, or you might have to do like a 2i. A 2i just means that it changes to a number. So there's like 2i. The other one is like 2f, which is float. So change to a float. And then by default, there's like a 2s. That's a change it to a string. That's if you have something else like coming in like a number or any other values that could be converted back to string. But by default, it is a string. So here with the age, you can grab the user's input, and whatever they put, it will convert it into the integer equivalence of it. So that's how you can do numbers. Cool. Any questions about hashes? Your previous assignment does deal a lot with it. Okay. So let's also talk about the other thing that we got into, which was Ruby gems. So Ruby gems. And again, what Ruby gems are is they're tools that we're able to use. Sometimes they're referred to as packages. And it's just pre-built code that someone else already written for us to use. And occasionally you would hear them be called libraries. But today we'll be finding out that most of these items, most of the Ruby gems are made out of modules. So if you actually dig into some of the code inside of these Ruby gems, they're mostly modules, which is one of our topics for today. And what you do with Ruby gems is at first you would do like a bundle init inside of the folder you want to have gems in. And what this will do is it will give you a gem file. And this houses all the gems for you to use in the project. Technically, you can just do like a gem install and whatever gem, but that's only locally to your machine. If you have a gem file, I can transfer that whole project as well as a gem file to someone else's computer and run a bundle to install it. Then that person will have the same access to those gems, or else it will be local and it won't work like you wanted to with those programs. So after you added gems inside of the gem file, you would have to run a bundle. Example of a gem is pry. We also take a look at colorize and other gems as well. Bundle is short for bundle install, so you can do either or, doesn't matter. I usually just do bundle because it's shorter. And then to use any of these gems in your file, go ahead and read the documentation. Most likely it will require you to do the require keyword at the top of the file, and then the name of the library, in this case pry, and then whatever you want or however it is you're using it. For this specific gem, you would put binding.pry where you want to debug your code. So that's just a gist of Ruby gems. Any questions about Ruby gems?
Do we have to be careful using gems, like if they get outdated and stuff?
Yes, that's why we pinned the version numbers. As you remember, there's like version numbers here. These aren't the right version numbers, by the way, but this is just for example. So if your project needs a certain version, then you have to pin the version number. Or else if you don't have it, if you just have just gem and pry, every time you run a bundle, it'll actually grab the latest version of that library. So by default, it grabs the latest one, or else you can pin it to a certain version if your project needs a certain version. That's a good question. Any other questions about Ruby gems? We'll be using gems a lot. Rails itself is a Ruby gem, so we'll be seeing how that works with that. So now let's go ahead and talk about classes and modules and some other concepts, as well as some items that you may hear thrown around in computer science here and there. Again, those are just hard words, but they actually have easy definitions. And I'll show you what they are. But first, let's talk about classes and also modules. And we talked about this a bit when we talked about data types. They're mostly considered objects because everything inside of Ruby is considered objects itself. But with classes, however, how you should look at it is that they are blueprints of other objects. So if I have a car class, that is a blueprint of a car. If I have a person class, that's a blueprint of a person. Is whatever you can do and whatever that object has with a class here. And can anyone take a stab of what keyword classes are in Ruby? Starts with a C.
Class?
Class?
It is with class. Yeah, you'll see Ruby is really straightforward when it comes to naming. So a class in Ruby is called class. And the best practice or the convention is that the class name is always capitalized. So always capitalized. So that's what it is. And if it has multiple words, again, it's with the underscore if you want to do it like that. And you always need to end it as well. It's one of those coding blocks that we talked about. Is that anything inside of this end is considered a block of code. So a better example, and let's be a little bit more specific, instead of saying class name, class that we'll be dealing with later on in class is person, right? And again, this is just a blueprint of what we can do with this person and what this person has. And we have to be very, very generic, or else if we just say that this is Bob, the Bob class, that only pertains to only Bob. We have to be a little bit more broad because this should work for every other person, not just Bob. How you would use a class is you would do a person.new. What this will do is it will actually create a new person from this blueprint. This is called instantiating a class. Instantiating a class. And from there, that goes along with instance of a person, which also goes along with instance variables. So we'll take a look at how instant variables play along with this here. And this will actually make more sense with the scoping of instant and instant variables. So that is a class. Just think of it as a blueprint of a specific object. And again, object is just a noun, a person, place, or thing that you're dealing with. Now let's go into modules. Modules, a quick word for it is just libraries. That's essentially what it is. And it's just code you can use over and over again. So code you can use over and over again. Most of the libraries or Ruby gems that we've been using, they're actually modules because we can use those over and over again. They're not just a one-time deal. Or after you close your server up, you still have access to it. And anyone can take a guess of what a module is in Ruby?
Module.
Sure. Yeah, that's exactly it. Keyword module, and then it's with the module name. Again, it's also best practice to do it with a capital letter for the module name. So this is what you would do over and over again if you're reusing code. And there are reasons why we have modules. And the first one is to keep our code dry. Has anyone heard that term before? Keep our code dry. What does this mean, actually?
Don't repeat yourself.
Yes. Excellent. This is an acronym that means don't repeat yourself. So essentially what we mean by that is that if you are repeating yourself, like let's say you're using a piece of code over and over again, whether you're copy and pasting or you're just writing that line over and over again, you're actually using wet code, not dry code. So the best practice here is that you should only do it once and then reference that within a module in this case, so you don't repeat yourself. So that way it'll clean up your code a lot more. It actually will be less lines of code, and it will be a lot more efficient. So that's what dry means. And also a convention. You'll be hearing this term thrown around a bit. And this is just either best practices or how things should be done in a language. Or should be done. So if I say it's convention to keep our code dry, that's just the best practice not to repeat ourselves. So we'll be touch basing on these words here and there. Okay. So now let's go into some computer science terms. Again, these are just keywords that you'll hear out there. I'm not going to be using them a whole lot. It's just for you to know, and you might stumble on it here and there. But I want to introduce it to you so it doesn't catch you off guard when you actually do see it. So the first one is OPP. Any guesses about what that stands for or know what it is?
Object-oriented programming.
Exactly. So it stands for object-oriented programming. And it's a type or a way of how you would program. And how you would do that is you would actually treat everything as an object. Everything as an object. Ruby is one of those languages that is an object-oriented programming language because we are treating everything as an object. Like classes, arrays are objects, strings are objects. Those are objects that we'll be using. And then we'll go into some other keywords. I'm going to scroll down just a bit. And this is inheritance. And this actually does fit with the real world definition of inheritance. So, but we're putting it in code base, right? So we think about inheritance. This only pertains to classes. No other object actually has inheritance. And it's essentially, it represents the relationship between objects. The relationships between objects. And the relationship that we should think about is parent to child. Parent to child. So everything the parent has, the child also has. And this is very similar to a real world example. If your parents both have blue eyes, it's more likely that you'll also have blue eyes as well. And in programming, it only goes one direction, right? So it can't go from child to parent, in a sense. And like I said, everything the parent has, the child also has access to. That's what inheritance means in the programming world, is a relationship between objects, parent to child, which means everything the parent has, the child also has access to. Okay. Next one is encapsulation. That one's a very intimidating word. But all it means is that we're just bundling data with methods. So essentially what class is, we are bundling everything that we are doing with that class with methods there. So it should be able to make sense. So if you're changing a name, that should be in the person's class, not in a different class there. And then polymorphism, another very intimidating word. If we break this word down, it just means poly, which means many, and then morph, which means forms or many types, right? So this one is pertaining to classes. And essentially what this means is objects can take many forms. And I'll show you a good example of that once we jump into some examples of classes. So just know for now that objects can take many forms. And then the last set of definitions have to do with testing. If we do get to testing, and this is very different with testing of how you would traditionally do it on like a sheet of, or like a proctor testing, anything like that. But within coding is checking to see if the code works as intended. So it's making sure that the code is doing what it should be doing. And there's different types of testing. Again, we'll go into testing on another day, but the one that I want to introduce to you today is called TDD, which is test-driven development. And essentially, you would write your test first and write your code to pass your test. Awesome. And then I'm going to go ahead and Slack this out for you all, so you have this in your notes as well. So those are some of the definitions. Again, I won't be using them too much here and there, but you'll see them around in the real world in your development career. So be sure that you know essentially what it means for those types of terms. But then let's go ahead and go into classes. So I'm going to introduce classes and modules, and then we'll break them down even more between classes and modules. But before that, any questions of anything I went over so far?
I don't know if this is like a sensible question, but like, is there an opposite of object-oriented programming, or is like scripting, like, what would be different than it?
Oh, that's an excellent question. There's different types of programming languages. Some of them, they have different things that you would do. So there's behavior-oriented programming, BOP, behavior, for example. This is instead of treating everything like an object, the main focus of this type of programming is to make sure that you get the exact behavior that you want it to be. And there's other types of programmings out there like that too. So it's just the way you actually approach programming itself.
Okay.
Any other questions? Okay, let's go ahead and intro some classes, and then we'll take it from there. So I'm going to create a new file. So we'll be creating a bunch of new files. So get used to creating files here. And essentially, the best practice with these, with classes and modules is that each class and each module will actually be in their own file. So it is very rare where you have them in the same file itself. So let's go ahead and create a file, and we are calling this person.rb. Person.rb. And then within person, again, this is just an intro class, just to show you how it works and what it looks like. We'll begin to break things down of what makes up a class after we intro both classes and modules. So let's go ahead and create a person's class. And you can also note that whatever the class name is more likely or not, the file name is the same name as the class name. So occasionally you would see a correlation like that. So inside of a class, there's an attribute assessor. And I'll tell you what that is later on down the line in the lecture. And the attribute that you have access to is name and age. And initially, most classes has this keyword method. It's the initial method here. That's why initial is actually a reserved word. So when you actually run this class, it actually runs this initial method first. And usually what you would do is you would grab whatever information that you're grabbing from the class and then setting that to instance variables so you have access to it down the line inside of this class. And occasionally you would have some encapsulation going on, or you have some method that does some stuff with the information provided in this class. So here, if I want to increase the age with like a given number, I can use the @variable, the instance variable I created here. And I can do like a plus equals number of whatever it is that they're using. Okay, I'm going to zoom out just a bit. And let me also select out what I have here. Give me one second. So that's what a typical class will look like. You'll have attribute assessors, the initial method, and other methods as well. So to use this class, you would have to instantiate it. And to also play around with it, I would also recommend setting it to a variable. So let's say I have a person, his name is Jake. And this Jake here is actually a new person. So I'll do person.new. And I need the person class actually requires me to have both the name and the incoming age. So the name is going to be a string and the age is going to be integer. And if you're having the user input this, you might have to validate that user info somehow. But we're just playing around with it like this. So what this will do is that this will create a new person with these parameters. So Jake as the name, 54 as the age. And you're able to use this variable here to access everything about that person. So if you want to take a look at Jake's name, you can do Jake.name. And I'm actually going to print it out like this. So if I go into my terminal and run a Ruby and the person.rb file, I can see that I have a string of Jake here. Now, what do you think I would do to get his age? What would I do a dot for?
Age?
Yeah, dot age. And this will give you Jake's age. So So Jake and his age 54. Now with this method, it works in pretty much a similar way. So if I want to use anything with the person class, you can see that I just need a dot and then whatever it is inside of that class, right? So the name or the dot age. But with the method, you would also do a dot as well. So you need to call Jake, which is an instance of a person, increase age, and increase age requires a parameter, and I'm going to increase it by 2. And then I'll also print out his age again to see if there is a change. So I'm calling the method inside of this class with a dot and then passing in the parameter like this. So let's try this out now. So his original age was 54, and then 56, and then 56 again. What do you think is going on?
You print out Jake's age, like it all happens on that same line as it prints it out, right?
Yeah. So what this is doing is that this is actually his original age, not his well this is his age after it increased the age by 2. So it goes through this method. So 2 goes into here. At age is originally 54 plus equals 2. So age is now 56. So that's why we're seeing a 56 there. Awesome. And that is a quick introduction with the class there. Any questions about that? We'll break it down a little bit more in a sec, but any questions about how we define it or how we're using it?
Could you just Slack that real quick?
Sure.
For some reason, I must have had an error because I'm just not getting the same return.
Yeah, the same thing.
Yeah, there might be some sort of a typo somewhere, but that's totally fine. Okay. Let's kind of dive a little bit more into methods inside of classes. And then that's going to be it for the intro of a class. So let's do that, and then we'll take our first break. So I'm going to create a new file inside of this folder, and I'm going to call it dog.rb. Dog.rb. And what do you think this dog would have, this file would have? Essentially, it will have a blueprint of
For dog.
a dog. Exactly. So for example, it would be very similar to how we defined a person. So it would have some attributes we have access to, such as name as well as breed. And then initial method. So initially, what we would do and I am going to set those as variables so I can use them later on. And notice here I'm using an instance variable rather than other types of variables here, or like a class variable or anything like that. The reason being is that if we are going to use this over and over again, the name is actually different. And I'll show you a little bit of that in a sec. So let's talk about different methods you can put inside of classes. For example, there's this type of method, which is I will actually put the name of the dog here. is the breed of, and then the breed here. And I'm using an instance variable because if I use a local variable here, I'll actually be out of scope. That's why we need to change it from an instance variable so we have access to that here in this method. And for this particular method, this is actually called an instance method. So this only makes sense for a particular dog, right? So if you have a dog with a name and a breed, it'll actually print out a method like that. The other one is called a class method. And with the class method, actually starts with the keyword self. And then the name of the method itself. In this case, bark. So essentially what class method is that what you want to do with all dogs in particular. And for example, all dogs bark. So like wolf. But instance method only works for a particular dog. So a particular dog has a name and a breed. So we'll play around with this idea. Anyone here with a dog?
My dog's name is Arlo.
Is that spelled
Dog,
like that?
Willie.
Yep.
Yep, that's it.
And there's another dog called Lily, I heard.
No, it's Willie.
Willie. Okay, sweet. We'll play around with these two dogs. So first, let's go ahead and use this dog here of Arlo. And we are going to set this variable to new dog dot new and Arlo. And what breed is Arlo?
He's a Yorkie.
Yorkie. Yeah, sure.
You got it right.
Awesome. So with this particular dog, if I do Arlo dot name and dot breed, it'll give you Arlo's name and breed. That's what we saw in our last example. But let's play around with these new types of methods here of info and bark. So if I do Arlo dot info, and we don't need to put puts here because this one already has a puts in the method. So that's why we don't need to puts anything. I just created another file. That's awesome. Let me go ahead and run this file. So it will be ruby dog.rb. And you can see that it has a dog of Arlo is the breed of Yorkie. But let's go ahead and try bark the same way, actually. So if we do Arlo.bark, what do you would think that it should happen?
That's woof.
Yeah, let's test this out. You actually get an error. The reason being is that you'll get an undefined method of bark for a particular type of dog. So the other main difference between a class method and an instance method is that you can't really call bark on a instance of a class. You can only call it on the class itself. So if you actually want this to work, it's actually dog.bark. See the difference there? So instead of calling it on an instance of a dog, you're calling it on the dog class itself. So this is where you would get wolf. So it works a little bit differently there. So instance work for a particular dog, and this works for the main dog class. So what all dogs should do.
That's confusing, that syntax with the self bit. Can you explain that?
Yeah, so what self means is that it is itself in sense of dog is the self thing. So technically you're doing dog.bark here.
You could put dog there instead if you wanted to, right?
Not quite, because that thinks that you're doing a method call here.
Okay.
So that's why the keyword self here is saying that you want the class name dot bark equals to this.
So do you always define it that way, like self dot something?
Yep. So all class methods starts with the keyword self.
Okay.
So like with our person, it would be self.walk because every person walks.
Yep, exactly.
Got it.
So now let's do one more dog and then we'll go into our next break. In particular,
Can
as
you
you can
black out the code you have?
yes. Let me type out these next lines of code and then I'll Slack it out.
Okay, thank you.
So in particular, this isn't the same dog. We're not reassigning it to the same dog, right? This is actually a different dog. It's actually a new type of dog. So with Willie, what breed is Willie?
Border Aussie.
I'll just put Aussie. These are two different dogs, agreed? So technically they should have two different messages here. So if I do, sorry, not Arlo, Willie.info and Arlo.info, they will give you two different types of messages because they're two different dogs. So that is one of the reasons why you would use an instance method, is that for each dog, it will have its own custom message. So you have Arlo and Willie. And then again, for them to bark, you would just do dog.bark, right? That's something that all dogs will do. So you don't necessarily need to have it to be a specific one. So just to recap, instance method happens at a particular instance of a class. And a class method is what you would do with the whole class itself. So what every class should be doing. And and this kind of elaborates on variables, instant variables as well, because if you check this out here, this is where it will start to click with instance variables. If I do arlo.name, which is technically at name, right, which is an instant variable, as well as Willie at name, you would get two different results. Oh, am I not printing them out? Sorry. Yeah, let me print that out for you all to see. There we go. You get two different results. The reason being is that the scope of this particular variable is an instantly scope. So as long as you're using this particular line of code, this particular reference of Arlo, at name will always be the string of Arlo.
So is that how you would get user input then? Would you do like arlo.name equals gets? So that you could, like, if someone was putting in their dog's names for a list that you wanted it to add to your class.
I would actually put it here instead of assigning it to another
So you
thing.
could put it in the dog.new and then you do, where would you put the gets? That's where I'm getting lost.
Sure. Let's go into that. Let's say that instead of a predefined dog here, we have the user type in their dog, right? So we'll have users input equal to gets dot strip or chomp, whatever you want to use. And what you would do is that you'll have the user's dog be equal to dog dot new. And we actually need two things, right? We don't need just one input. We actually need two inputs. So to be more specific, this would be user's input of the name, the dog's name, and another user's input of the dog's breed. So you actually need two inputs and two prompts as well. So that way this user input of name would go into here, and the user input of breed would go into here.
Okay. That
So
makes
that's
sense.
how you would have the user's input
Gotcha.
to create a new dog.
Cool. Thanks.
Awesome. Going back to the instance is that instance variables have the scope of, as long as you're using this particular instance of a dog, that's the scope of that variable there. As soon as we're using Willie, that's now a new variable of @name equals to Willie, the string of Willie. So that's how instance variables work, is they work by instance itself. Cool. So enough of that. Let's go ahead and take a break, and we'll go into the intro of modules next. So let's go ahead and take a break. Come back at 7:15. 7:15. Where we left off was we talked a little bit about intro to classes, and we also talked about instance and class methods and the instance itself, and how that works for us. So now let's go ahead and dive into modules. So let's go into modules. I'm going to create a new file. Oops. And I'm going to call this file the same name as the module name, because it's just how the best practice is. So it'll be touch math.rb. And then with that, let me show you an introduction about modules. So keyword of module is module, and then the name of it is capitalized. And then again, with modules, it's items that you want to be using over and over again. All right, so if I have num1 and num2 for add, and I'll do like this. So num1 plus num2. And let's say that I have one for all of the operations. I'll just do add and subtract for now. So in another file or in another place, I'll just do this in the same file for example's sake. You would include this module like so. So let's say that you have another class somewhere else inside of your project directory, and it's a math assignment. And with this math assignment, I want to include this math library here, this math module here. So I'll do include math here. Sometimes if you are doing it from different files, you might have to include it differently. You might have to require it first, and then you can include it, things like that. But if it's in the same file, you can do include.
A super simple question. Is there a reason you don't do math underscore assignment, or is it just personal preference?
Oh yeah, that makes more sense. You're right. That'll be math assignment.
Okay.
But yeah, personal preference. If this looks better for you, you can use it like that. But the best practice would be underscore. And then let's go ahead and see how we can use them here. So it's actually pretty simple. The only step you would need to do is just include it. And that's technically what it does, is that it brings all of these methods into right here. So technically, if I do like a math assignment for my first solution, would just be add 10 like that. Then that would be my first solution like that. So you actually would use it like if you are defining the method inside of this class. So that's how modules work, is that you first need to include them, and then you're able to use them like it's already there, like it's already included. In order for you to see what this is, you would have to do a few things. So I'll do like a assignment 1 equals math assignment.new. And then with this, I'm just gonna say assignment 1 dot first solution. And I'll print this out for you all to see. I create another file. Which is 21 there. So that's how modules work, is that whatever you're doing over and over again, because technically I can just do this method over and over again. But a better use case is just to bring it up into modules so you can have it be done better. And that is a module. And the really cool thing about this is that you can use this in your math assignment class or in a different class and other classes that you can have access to. For example, you might have a module for your Thursday project about like your wallet or having money taken away or added to your wallet. And that could be used in other classes like the slot machine class or the blackjack class, things like that. So that's a good use case of a module there. Okay, let me select this out here. And that was a brief introduction with both classes and modules. Now I'm just gonna go ahead and dive deep into mostly classes because modules are pretty straightforward. Classes, you're able to do much more things with them. So let's dive deeper into classes here.
Hey, Henry.
Yes.
Just a quick question. So when we're creating these files, when we build our modules, is it like, are we able to create like a module and then have that live in another file? For instance, if we were using the dog.rb file and we wanted to call the module math, which was saved in math.rb, is that a common practice to maintain like dry code, as you said earlier?
Yep. The thing is, you may have to look it up how to bring it into other files. From what I remember, you might have to require it above. So require relative. And then the path to the module. Luckily for us, is just right next door. So you can just do /math. And that will bring in the whole entire file. But if it's in another folder, you have to go / the folder name and then eventually find your way to the math file itself. So that is what you would do in other files. It's something like that. That's a good question. Any other questions about modules? So let's again create another file. So touch parent.rb. And here we're actually going to talk a little bit about inheritance and how it will look like inside of our code. So if we have a class here of the parent, right, it's just for example's sake, so words will be the same here. And I have a method here that is from the parent method. And I would just say puts called from parent. So we have one class here, right? Now, let's say that we have another class here called child. As of right now, these are actually two different types of classes. They have no relationship at all. But if you do want a relationship, like an inheritance relationship of parent to child, it will be with this symbol here. So it will be this little less than sign and then parent. So essentially how you read this is that this class of child inherits from parent. So this class of child inherits from parent. So everything the parent has, the child also has. And let me show you. So right here, you can see that I don't have a method inside of child, but I do have a method inside of parent. So if I create and instantiate both of those classes, so I'll do P and C for parent and C for child. And with this, I can do p.use parent method. Well, that's how you would use it anyways, because it's part of its own class, right? So let me go ahead and run this real quick. Oh, great. Called from parent. But the other thing is that even though that C doesn't have a method, I can actually call any method that is from the parent inside of the child. So I can also do use parent method as well inside of the child. And here we are. So essentially everything the parent has, the child also has as well. And that goes with having methods here that you can use from the parent. Now there are some things that, what if you want to change the method here and there? And let me show you how to do that. So I'm going to copy this and comment it out. So if you want to override the method, then how you would do it is that it has to be the exact same method name with the exact same method parameters. So if I want to say use parent method, but I want to change the actual put statement, like let's say I want to do puts called from child, then I can override the parent method by using the same exact method name and the parameters. So I'm going to show you p.use parent method and p.use parent method here. I mean c.use parent method. So let me slack out what I have so far. So if I want to override the method from the parent inside of the child, I just need to have it the exact same name and parameter, and I'm able to change whatever it is I'm doing there. So that is overriding the method. Now, if you just want to alter it a bit, like if you want to use what is in here or change it up a bit, let me show you how to do that. Again, I'm going to copy and paste another set here for example's sake, because I still want you guys to have the other ones as notes. So if you want to alter the original method with other items inside of it, you still need to have the same method name as well as the parameters. But let's say that I want to bring in whatever's inside of that method as well. So to do that, it will be super. What super does is that it brings in everything from the parent to the child. So you see here, if I run this code, you can see that I am bringing in the parent because of the first line, and also the child and that message from the parent as well. So super, you can actually bring in everything in the method, and you can modify it however you need there. So that's what you would do when you would alter certain methods there. But the key thing is that just looking at items, if you want to inherit from another class, is what this symbol here, right? This little less than symbol, and what you're inheriting from. And then inside of that, you can use the same exact method in there, or you can modify or override it within the child class itself. So let's actually use a practical example. It might be using if we say child and parent here. So let's actually create another file again. I have so many files today. We'll do touch mammal. And we're actually going to be creating a blueprint of a mammal. So here, I'll do class of mammal and end it before I forget, or else I'll get that error saying keyword n, you either have an extra one or one too many n's. And then I'll do attribute assessor for the name and the age of each of the mammal. And then at the very beginning, the initialize. Initially, we would grab the name and the age coming in and setting that to instance variables for us to use either inside of this particular class or inside of the instance outside of the class itself. So with this mammal class here, I am going to say all mammals breathe, right? So that would be puts, inhale, exhale. We're not going to do class or instance methods here because this will make more sense if it was a class method, but this is only for example's sake. So if I have a method of inhale, exhale here for breathe, and then for speak, they have to override it because not all mammals speak the same way, right? So I'll actually put a error here. You can actually make your own errors inside of Ruby. Let me show you how. It will actually be with this keyword here. So it will be raise. You must override the method. So they have to override this method or else they'll get this error that we created here. Okay. So let's play around with this. I'm going to zoom out just a bit and also slack out this class. And let's say that we have a cat here. And it, oh, I spelled cat with an R. A cat here. And this inherits from the mammal class here. So the cat is the child, the mammal is the parent. So initially, what I want to do is whatever initially we're doing for the mammal, right? So that is with the age and the name there. And we are bringing it down to this class too. So to do that, we'll use the keyword of super. Now we can use breathe because that's from the parent and everything that the parent has, the child also has access to, and speak. But with speak, we need to override it or else we'll get this error here. So I'm actually going to not do it at first, or I'll do it, comment it out to show you what the error looks like, and then I will do it by overriding it, uncomment it out. So to override it, it will be with the exact same name as the parent method as well as the parameter. And then the cat will say, meow, sure. Does anyone here have a cat?
I do.
What is your cat's name?
Turkey.
Turkey. Yeah, let's go with Turkey. We'll do cat.new. And how old is Turkey?
2008. She's 12.
12. Awesome. So with Turkey, we'll do turkey.breathe. And that's coming from the parent class, right? The mammal class there. And this turkey here, I'm actually going to comment this out before I run this. I am also going to do speak. And right now I have speak coming from the parent as well. So let's go ahead and see what this gives us. Oh, I keep doing that. Let me do this. So it does do our breathe, which is inhale, exhale, but you see that it hit our error, right? It says you must override the method on line 14. So let's go ahead and fix that error by uncommenting this out. And now it should breathe in as well as speak. So inhale, exhale. I forgot to put puts here. Yeah, let me do that here. That's why it didn't display anything. So inhale, exhale, and meow there. And that's the gist of inheritance. So with inheritance, that's the key word is cat inherits from mammal. Everything a parent has, the child also has access to. And you can change it up if you need to as well. And actually, it looks really better on the board. So essentially, it looks like a tree if you boil it down into it. So we have a mammal here, and inside of it, it kind of branches out. So mammal also has a cat, but let's say also it has another child of dog here. Like that. So as you can see here, this is a tree structure. It's kind of like an upside down tree. So the root is actually on the top and the branches are going down. So essentially how this plays out is that the parent is the top, and then when it goes down, those are the children. So you can actually go down even further down if you want to as well. So we can break it down even more. Like instead of dog, we would have a different breeds, right? Like a corky.
If we add a characteristic to a child, can we also pass it to the parent? Is this a
No? It only goes one direction. So it only trickles down from mammal to dog. It can't go from dog to mammal.
Okay.
The closest thing to that is you have to override a method, and that's the closest thing you can do. So this is called siblings, because they share the same parent. So any class that shares the same parent is a sibling, and then this is the child of a child. So for this Corky, it's wrong for a reason. And for this Corky, it has everything a dog has as well as a mammal. So actually it has access to both of these classes as a parent. And that's how inheritance works here.
Repeat that again. Did you say the Corky had so it inherits from both the dog as well as the grandparent, so to speak?
Exactly.
Did the override still work?
What was that?
Did the overrides? So
yes.
Okay.
They would still work. But it really depends on how the override is doing. Like let's say that we have a override of speak of dog here. If you're trying to override it, it would actually be dog, not this first one here. So it's the most recent one, or the parent, the most relative parent override method first.
Okay. Could I override a method in mammal that I didn't override? So I guess if you're in Corky, could I override something in mammal that I didn't override in dog?
Yeah, you can. Okay. Yep. And you might have to play around with it. Okay. So sometimes you might have to pass it down all the way down through the tree with super keyword. Like let's say the name and age is something you want to have access to. You might want to pass that down here as well. Good questions. So that's essentially the gist of inheritances, parent to child relationships. Okay, so now let's break this down even more. I'm going to talk a little bit about each of these lines. Well, mostly this one. These are just methods. We talked about them before, about class methods and instance methods. But we'll break these down even more, especially this one, because that one looks so weird at first. So essentially what attribute assessor is that you're able to read and write the name and age. So if you're doing attribute assessor of name and age, you're able to see what the name is and to define what the name is. Now there are other things you can do as well. So you can also have attribute reader, and this takes place of attribute assessor. This one is only read. So this is saying that you already have a value for name and age, and you're only able to read the name and age. And then lastly, if you just want the write, it will be write. And this one is only have the ability to write the name and age. I don't really see a good use case of this because you have to see what you're writing, or else how do you know what to write? But that is one of the attributes that you can do. But in most cases, you would do attribute assessor, which has the ability to both read and write these attributes here, right? These characteristics of a class. So that's what that line is the availability of what you can do with those types of parameters being passed in. Okay. So let me slack this out now. Cool. So any questions about that? That might be a little bit hard to grasp by the look of it. So for this next example, I am going to go ahead and try a live use case of a class and maybe even a module. So you can actually see this in action with like users inputs and imports and exports and all that. So again, let's do one more file. So touch app.rb. And this is how we use other classes inside of another file. So require relative, and in this case, I can just use person. This is the person class I'm bringing in. I'm going to comment this out actually. So let's create another class of app. And this is our application that we'll be doing here. And we actually need the person class for this to work. And we'll update the person's class for this to work even better. But first, let's just have it like this. So attribute assessor, instead of designating everything a person has already, we can just do person. Because if we take a look at the person, that already has attribute assessor name and age. Right, so we just to keep things dry, we can just say person here instead of name and age again here. And initially, so you can do it two ways. You can do initialize or initial. Well, that was weird. There we go. Those both mean the same thing. I'm just writing in a different way, so you'll see it differently. But initialize and initial, they work the exact same way. Is what is run first when you first instantiate or when you first call the class name itself. So here I am actually going to do an @person equal to actually the return effect of this method called initial person. This is actually a method I'll be creating here that creates a whole person. So if I do def, oh, I already did def, def init person, which is the method I have there, and I'll do puts, enter your name, and then I'll do name gets equals a strip, and I'll do another output message of enter your age. And age would be a gets.toI. I will also strip that as well. And then to use that information inside of a class, the proper way to do that is to have another variable, a person here, to now be reassigned, because person was this method. Now this is person reassigned to person.new with that information of name and age that they inputted here in the user's input.
Just a quick question.
Sure.
At the very beginning, when you wrote require relative, lowercase person, or would that be capital? As well as attribute accessor, would that be lowercase or capital person?
That's an excellent question. So with this particular person here, that's actually referring to the file name.
Oh,
So
okay.
I'm referring to the lowercase person, which is this entire file here. This also means essentially the same thing. It's everything inside of that file, this lowercase person here.
I suppose I should have known that since I asked that question earlier, how to reference a file. Sorry about
That's totally fine. But this here, this capital P person is more specific to this person class inside of this file. So we have other things inside of this file, like Jake, for example, it only grabs this person here, not the entire file itself. That's a good question.
So if you're in the same working directory, does that mean you don't need a path, like for the require relative?
Yep.
Is that how it works basically? Like,
Yep.
but if this were just like one folder over, you'd have to put that in.
Yeah. So it'll be / in the folder name, and then the file name.
Right.
But if it's right next door, you can just reference it as the file name itself.
And you don't need the extension.
No, you don't need the extension. Awesome question. So now let's do app dot, not app, app dot, capital app dot new. So this will create a new app instance, and it will initially create a new person. And let me check my person's class to make sure that, yeah, let me comment this out here. Okay, so yeah, let's try this out. So your person class should just has these lines of code here. I'll re-slack it out. And then your app would be like this. So I'm going to run my app file, not my person's file, but my app file. So it'll be Ruby app.rb. Nothing happened. What's going on?
Same thing happened to me. What didn't happen to me, I guess.
Huh, interesting. Technically, it should prompt the user first and foremost. So let's do a little bit of debugging here. I just want to see if it gets to this point here. Because if that's not right, that means that something else up here might be hitting it. Yeah. So let me take a look at this here. Is it just me, or is person starting to look weird?
Henry, I did initialize
Instead
and
of
it worked.
initial?
Yeah.
I did the same thing. Yeah.
Guess in Ruby it has to be initialized then. Okay, that's good to know. So enter your name, and that's not my real age, by the way. And you can see here that it prompts you and creates a whole new person there, which is awesome. The thing is that if you do a p app person here, you can actually see that if you actually print that out, it'll look like this. So this is the Ruby equivalence of a class when it's printed out. So that's why you would need to have it a much more formatted output. Because here you can see all the name and the age, but still it's still unreadable, right? So it would be better if you would do like name equals name and then also age like that. That would help. And that's how you would use classes inside of other classes. The main reason was this was called initial instead of initialize. So I'm going to probably change that in the lecture too. So let me re-slack this out. So any questions about that? This is actually what you'll be doing inside of your assignments, is that you'll get some users input, create new instance of a object with them, and then start to use them like so. Okay, if there aren't any questions, let's go ahead and take our last break. Come back at 8:05. 8:05. Get back into it. So for the last part of class, there's one more thing about classes I want to share with you all, and then we'll jump into some testing. And then we'll see what we can do with the remainder of the time as well. So let me show you this. I'm not going to really type it out. I just want to show you what it is and how the really benefits of refactoring into inheritance. So you'll probably hear the term refactoring. Essentially, what that means is that you're rewriting your code into the more efficient way as possible. So let's say that we updated the person's class. So it has the first name, last name, role, and school. And this is inside of your Neo LMS, which I will release shortly. With this, depending on what type of role the student is, the person is that they'll actually get a different type of message. So depending on the role, you'll have a case statement. When they're student, TA, or teacher, they have a message depending on their role. Or also just raise an error saying invalid row. And you can put all the items in with people's names, roles, as well as school. And then you can see all those different greetings. So that's what you would traditionally will do, is you would have a big case statement like that. But since we learned about inheritance, you can actually clean up this code a bit, where you can have it be inheritance. So by default, it would be a person's class, and a person has first name, last name, and school. Notice that there's no role here, right? Above we have a role, but here we just have just the bare essentials of name and the school. And then the greeting is actually by default, if they don't have a role specified, then it will raise some sort of an error. So this is where inheritance comes to play. Essentially, each of their roles, instead of having it be a huge case statement, we have each of those as their own class. So with their own class, all of the classes actually inherits from the person. So everything the person has, everything the child has, the person also has as well. So the parent to child relationship. So they have access to all the first name, last name, and school. And here, we're just overriding each of the method here of greet to not be an error, and we can specify each of those messages like that. So technically, if you are doing it this way with inheritance, then you can actually clean up your code and eliminate a whole other attribute all entirely, right? So you can just put their names as well as their school, and then their role is technically the class you're using here. And they will give you the same results, but you're actually writing it a much more efficient way. So any questions about that? This might need to get some taking a look at. So I'll go ahead and Slack this out. Well, I'll Slack this out first. So you'll can take a look at that. And this is one particular case where inheritance actually makes it much more easier. And this is another example if we need to refactor it again, like let's say we're adding another item of salary. It's just as simple as adding it in the parent or at just the level that you need. So just the teacher level of salary, then you can just have that attribute like that. So if you have any additional attributes that is only role based, you can just add it inside of the role itself, not inside of the parent or anything like that. So that's the other thing that I want to show you with classes. Okay, so now let's go into testing. And again, this is just a quick intro into Ruby testing. We'll dive deeper into testing on a whole nother day. So let's go ahead and create actually a whole nother folder as well as files inside of that folder. So I'm going to make a payroll, for example. So make dir payroll. And then the cd into there. So cd into payroll. Oh, I spelled it wrong. Payroll, no R right here. There we go. So create a directory called payroll and then go into the payroll directory that you just created. And let's create some files. So first, I need a gem file because in order to test, it's actually much more easier if you use a third-party tool. So in order to do that, I actually need to run this command of bundle init. So bundle init. So be sure you're in the payroll folder when you're doing this. And this will create a gem file for you inside of the payroll folder. The other files that we need, so let's go ahead and create those as well. Something called a capital R rake file, and make sure you have a capital R rake file here, as well as a main.rb. So rake file is needed for the configuration of the tools that we're using. And some of these tools, you need to configure them a certain way. And for this particular tool, we need to put all the configurations in a rake file. The main.rb, that is where we will have our main code that we will be testing. So that's what those two files are. And then lastly, inside of your payroll, we'll create another folder called specs. You can do spec or specs, most likely is specs, just because essentially what specs are, those are all your tests that you'll be running. So you'll actually be putting your tests inside of the specs folder here. So let's go ahead and open this up if you haven't already. And I'm actually going to exit everything out. And let me show you a cool trick with VS Code. If you have a bunch of tabs like I do here inside of your VS Code, you can manually just click X all of them at once. Or you can go up here at this panel here. Might have to open it if it's not open already. And you can click this button here. So what this button is, it closes all the editors. So it closes all those tabs so you can start fresh. This one here is a save all. So if you have multiple files you need to save in, you can press that button too. But pretty sure most of you have autosave on, so that should be good. And then this just toggles vertical and horizontal editor layouts. You may or may not use that. But let's go ahead and go into this payroll, and we are going into the gem file first. So the gem file first, because we need to import our tools. So within our tools, we are going to have a few gems to handle them. First one is called rspec. That is our testing library that we'll be using. And you can read a little bit more about it in rubygems.com. And specifically, this is only for Ruby testing. You can't use rspec inside of other languages. You can also use rspec in Rails as well, and we'll be doing that. We'll be taking a look at that on a different day. And the other thing that you need is rake. Rake is the helper that we would need to help configure all of our items. And it also helps us to run our tests too. So this is our testing library, and this helps us run our tests. Let me go ahead and slack out these two gems inside of the gem file. And at first, if this doesn't work for you the first time, that's totally fine. It didn't work for me the first time when I tested. It's just playing around with it. There might be some typos here and there, things like that. So don't be too caught up of if you don't get your test up and running. So let's go ahead and bundle our gems. Let's go ahead and go back into the terminal and run a bundle or a bundle install. And that will install all of the gems inside of our project. And it's quite a bit of gems because some of these gems require other gems as dependencies. So then that will give you a gem lock file. Again, we don't need to worry too much about the gem lock file. We can just continue on. So once you have that up and running, shouldn't take that long with these gems. Let's go ahead and go into the rake file so we can put some of our configurations. And I'm just pulling this. Yeah.
Sorry, what did you type in? Bundle install?
Yep.
Right?
Yes.
Okay.
For this next part, go ahead and go into Slack for this next part. Because I just grabbed this right from the documentation. So this is what lines you would need inside the rake file in order for your test to be run. So nothing too special here. And let's create another file inside of our specs to also have some configurations inside of our testing place as well. So I'm actually going to create it here. I'm going right click, new file, and going to call this spec_helper.rb. Spec_helper.rb. Again, go to Slack for this because I'm just pulling this directly from the documentation. And this is just to format and display all the tests and the configurations for when you run a test. Okay. So those are the main things you need just to start off, is those configuration files, which is rake and spec helper. The other things you need is those two gems. And then you can begin to write your tests. So I'm going to create a new file inside of my specs. And the best practice, the convention of naming your tests is whatever file you want to test. In our case, we are testing the main.rb file. It'll be main_spec. main_spec.rb. So I need to require a few things. First up, I need to require the spec helper, the configurations that I had inside of the other file. And the other thing is I also need to require relative everything inside of the main RB file, because that's what I am testing. And since it's in a whole nother folder, like it's out one folder, as you can see, it might be a little bit different for yours. It would be to go out one folder is // and then we are actually going to do the main.rb file here. So we're going out one folder into the payroll folder into the main.rb here. Now, testing looks completely different than what you're used to when you're coding in Ruby. And let me show you how it
Hey,
will.
Henry.
Yes.
The most recent Slack post, what file does that go into?
That will be inside of the spec_helper.rb file. Sorry, I guess I should have labeled them. So let me show you how tests looks like. So first you have a describe block, which describes a group of your tests. And then the test itself, it begins with an it block. So it adds 2 numbers. And you have to be very descriptive when you are writing these tests. Because technically you can be broad, but it's better to be more specific here. So if we have num1 equals like 1, num2 equals 2, the expected result, so we're just writing this out, thinking out loud, is it should be 3, right? Because if this test pass, 1 plus 2 equals 3. The actual result, so actual, will equal the sum method coming from main to RB. That's what this is being pulled from. And we are putting in those same exact parameters that we have. So num1 and num2, so 1 and 2. And this is the actual test case here. So we should expect actual to equal expected. That may not look as clear cut as it should be.
Is that
So
a 2 space equal or underscore?
This is a dot here.
Dot 2 space EQ?
Yep.
Okay.
Let me Slack this out. So let me explain this top to bottom one more time. So the describe block, this describes a bunch of tests that we're grouping all together. The it block is the individual test that we are writing. And you should be writing one test inside of the it block at a time. You shouldn't be testing multiple things. And what we're doing here is that we are plugging in some values, right? So 1 plus 2, since it adds, it will equal 3. That's the expected result. The actual value of, if we do put num1 and num2 inside of this particular function, that will be inside of that main.rb file there. And what we should expect for this to pass is that we should expect actual to equal expected. So what we're saying here is that these two values, they should both be 3 for this test to pass, or else it will fail. So that is how you write a test, is that you would put them into blocks, do some sort of a use case or some sort of a testing code, have the actual code running, and then compare that to what it should be to get it being passed. So in order to run the test, let me show you. You actually need to be back in the terminal. So let's go back into the terminal. And to run your test is with bundle exec. That's just using our rake as well as our bundler tools that we have to our disposal. Keyword rake, again, that just helps us run all of our tests. And then where we want to run our tests. In this case, it will be the specs folder. So you can just do specs, or you can do specs / that just means folder. And that tests everything inside of that folder. You can be even more specific. You can be specs, and then I believe we call it main _ spec.rb. You can do that as well, right? You can be specific file that you want to test. If you want to test this particular test, you can actually go by line. So you can do like :5 if you want to as well. So that's some of the ways you can run your tests. You can be very broad or specific as you need. But I'm just gonna run everything inside of the specs folder for now. That should give us something. I think I should rename it spec instead of specs. So let me go ahead and rename that to spec. So go ahead and rename your specs folder into spec. I think naming does matter here. So let me try that again. And you'll get a bunch of output. Let me actually zoom out so you can see this all on the same screen. So this is what a failing test will look like. ignore all of this stuff, like the stuff on the bottom and the stuff on the top. That just signifies what it ran until it hit this certain lines of code. So for the computer, it needs that information. For us, we can just ignore that information. That's really useless for now. The stuff that we do want to look at is these colorful things here, right? These things in the middle here. So top to bottom, it says that this particular test of inside of the sum describe block and the add two numbers failed. So inside of this particular test, it actually failed. And it actually gives a quick guess or its best guess of why it think it failed. So it tried to do this use case, but then you'll get an error, undefined method of sum, or this type of test. So that means that you are actually failing this test because you don't have a method called sum. So how can we solve this particular test?
Add a method sum to main.rb.
Correct. So let's get this test up and running inside of main.rb because it is looking for a sum method, but there's no sum method inside of the file anywhere. And it also gives you some characteristics of like how fast it finished or how long it took to load and how many tests failed and also how many tests in total, as well as where the failed tests are failing at specifically. So that is what a failed test will look like. This is actually not what you should strive for. You should strive for a passing test, which is what I'll be showing you next. So to solve this test, because of the error, I need to write a method here inside of main called sum. And I need to write it in a way for this to pass my test, right? And that's what test-driven development is that when you are writing your code, you're supposed to test first and then write your code to pass your test. So for this particular case, if I want to pass my test, I need to have a sum method passing in two parameters, and I need to return the sum of both of those parameters. In this case, I can just do that, right? Again, this is in the main.rb file. So let me slap this out. I'll do main.rb, and then here I'll do like that. There we go. So let's go ahead and rerun this line of code. That's weird. There we go. Let's rerun this command of bundle exec rate spec. Again, if this isn't working, see if you change this to be singular, not plural, because I had it plural before. And this is what passing test is. You can see that it has a lot less output for you, and it is green. So that's what passing test will look like. It's green with 0 failures and a lot of other statistics. So that is how you would technically test, is you would test the behavior and outputs of the method and to make sure that they're working properly. Any questions about that? It is a different way of doing things. It's not really the same way that we've been writing code so far.
What are the advantages of this methodology? Because like you just said, so in the past we kind of write the code and then we run it to see if things are working the way we want intuitively. But what are the advantages of writing the tests before you write the code? Yeah,
that's a good question. One of the advantages is to make sure that your code is working properly. Like if we write tests and we know that our program has to have a sum, subtract, multiplication, and it has to work, then we can follow those criteria for us to write the code itself for it to have a fully functioning program. Because if we don't have tests, we really rely on the code itself, and it might contain errors or it might not behave the way we want it to. And with tests, we can actually have it the way we want it to by validating if it's right or wrong.
The theory is that you can deploy more applications faster doing this. I don't know if you've heard of QA automation. It's like what Amazon does in Google. And their QA automation team, their whole objective is to create tests as they're coding, so that way the developers don't have to focus so much on testing everything. They're the ones that end up testing it, so they can deploy as many applications out as possible with less errors.
That's also a good point as well. Thanks, Daniel.
Look at Daniel dropping the knowledge bombs.
But yeah, and then testing, you can go as broad like we have here, or you can go even more specific, right? Like we can actually write multiple tests just on this single method here. Like we should test if what happens when the user puts in strings instead of integers, or what happens when you add 2 zeros together, things like that. So you can actually go even more specific when it comes into testing. But the main thing is that you should just test the bare minimum, right? You should, for the sum, you should make sure that it actually adds the 2 numbers, and then you can take it on from there.
So is the message that we should eventually do it, our development this way, like as a standard thing, or is it more like this is just a tool we could use depending on what we're doing?
It really depends, because most people, when they start off as one of their first jobs, is that they'll be writing tests, like they're QA or automated testers, a bunch of different types of testers, and all they do is they just write tests like this. The other thing is that when you are working in a live environment, you would have to write your code to pass these tests in order for it to be a full product. So you'll encounter testing in one shape or form later on in your career.
Okay,
that's for sure. And you'll start to hate testing, and you'll see why once we jump into JavaScript, because the syntax is horrible. But then you'll begin to love it and appreciate it later on too. Okay, any other questions about testing? Awesome. So technically I have scheduled another part of the lecture where we build out an application and then we'll test it, but I actually want your opinion on what we should do the last 30 minutes. So we can go ahead and review some items. If you want to, we can use the last 30 minutes to review. We can also use the last 30 minutes to have you work in your own homework group, if that works. Or we can have the last 30 minutes to work on a follow-along assignment, which is today's extra practice assignment. So what do you want to do?
I'm down for the homework, but whatever you guys, yeah, poll us.
Yeah, let me do a poll. This is my first time doing a poll here. Okay. And this is whatever is more beneficial for you all as a class. Okay. Okay, let's go ahead and launch this poll, and let's see what your opinion is. Looks like a race.
Cahoots has changed my thought process. How fast can I click?
Yeah.
That's one thing I learned about that game app is it's both correct. It's both speed and
correctness. Yeah.
Correctness. Yeah.
Yeah. And the more questions you get right in a row, they give you bonus points.
Whoa. Okay.
Yeah, I know. More pressure.
Yeah, on our game earlier, what is it, third through like sixth had the same amount of like answers correct. It was just all about speed.
I thought this was a countdown. It actually is counting up. So I'm just gonna end the poll because there is only 14 people. I was waiting for the. I don't know if you can see my screen or not. I thought this was a counter to count down, but yeah, it's not. But yeah, it looks like follow along won, and then homework is pretty close as well. So it's pretty much pretty split. How about what if I do 15 minutes of follow along and then the rest for homework? I can actually do that. So let's do that then. So let's actually do the follow along. And then we'll jump into homework. So I'm going to release today's lecture as well as the extra practice assignment. And then we'll see how we can approach that with classes and modules. So let me show that to you here. And again, no pressure on these extra practice. They're more for you to practice with instead of having them done. Okay, so with this one, it's pretty similar of what you did with your grocery store, as well as your other extra practice, if you did do them. Let me change this to the 29th. There we go. But instead, we're actually using classes here. So the basic objectives is that you have some main dishes as well as 2 side dishes here. And users can repeat orders and also display lunch items in total order, as well as some bonus objectives. And essentially, main dish and side dish is their own particular type of class. And you can have order as a class as well if you wanted to do it like that. So this is kind of the screenshot of what it could look like. Don't stress out of what it, if it doesn't look exactly like this, but I'll just run through the process of what it should do. So when you first launch the application, if this is finished, then it would say, what main dish would you like? Print out 3 main dishes. If you press 1, then that means you select meatloaf. Then what side dish would you like? And then you can press 1 for carrots, and that would say carrots. And then it'll ask one more side dish because you're supposed to get 2 side dishes. You can do another carrot if you want to as well. And then it will display your order. So meatloaf, carrots, and beef jerky. And then you have your total here of all of that. So let's go ahead and get started with that. And there's multiple ways you can do that. The way that I'm showing you might be different than the way you may approach it. So you're more than welcome to go off script if you feel like you can. So I'm going to do lunch lady folder in here. So it will be maker lunch lady. And I'm going to cd into lunch lady. And now thinking about it, what kind of classes do you think I need?
Main dish.
Yeah, main dish would be a class. So I'll do a file called main dish. What else?
Side dish?
Yeah, let's do one for side dish. And then we'll start with that there first. So we'll do main dish and side dish. And again, both of those are classes because you must use class inside of this assignment. And if you're still struggling with classes, what I would recommend is writing this in methods first, or writing this of how you would do it without classes, and then slowly convert them into classes, if that helps. So with main dish, it will be class main dish. I'll just do this so I have less typing to do later on. And then with this, I would have, let's see, looking at the objectives, I need to have a list of items as well as a way to have the user input one of those items. So let's see. So for example, probably have a method that displays all the main dishes, and another method that has the user input for one of those dishes. And maybe initially, I will also prompt the user that will call both of those methods. So I'll probably do that. So let's take care of some of these items. What is a way we can display all of our main dishes? So let's break this down even more. Like, let's say, what is one way we can hold all main dishes? How can we have a way to hold all of our main dishes? Yeah, so at, I'll just say dishes here, or main dishes here. And this would be equal to an array of dishes. So that would be key value pair if you want it to. I think that would be the best thing. So the name would be like meatloaf. And I think they have price. Yeah, they have price, which would be a float. So it does need a string. I think $4.75 is a good price for a good meatloaf. And I'll do two more. I'll do steak and then some salad. Sure. Wait, salad could be a side. Let me do a salmon. This would be $7.50. It's a little bit weird when you're dealing with like a value like this, so it might not carry the 0. It might just be 7.5. And then this one, salmon, is like
Actually, since you brought that up, that was one of the questions that we had on our homework assignment, was how to still show it with both decimal points when we.
It's actually really simple. I figured it out. I'll send it to you.
Rad.
Why don't you post it inside of the main?
Send it to all of us.
Post it in Slack once I find it.
You rock.
Yeah, because it makes sense for us to use it like this, but when you display it, you don't want to say 7.5. You want to say $7.50, right? So that's a really good use case for that.
Beauty.
The other thing, so we actually tackled that pretty nicely. It's a place so we can have all of that stored. So now let's go ahead and create a method that displays all the main dishes. And then we'll take it from there. So I'll just do def end display menu. And this wouldn't be the correct thing, right? If I just do a P and at main dishes here, what would you actually see?
Name colon meatloaf comma price colon 475.
Yeah, you'll see actually everything, right? That's it works, but it's not really readable. So we actually need a way for us to loop through this and print out each of those as individual things. So what is one way you can
Would that be main_dishes.map?
Yeah, exactly. I was about to say, what is one way you can iterate through these items? And .map is a really good way. So .map is a way you can loop through each of those items. And I'm going to call those food. And then with that, I'm going to do puts string of, I think there was an option for you to do index values, right? So you might have to, if you want index values like what they have here of like 1, 2, 3, 4, you might have to use another loop like dot each with index. And that could be the same thing, but I'm not going to do those. I'm just going to interpolate the name. So the food dot name. And I think the price was like inside of parentheses. So inside of parentheses, I'm going to interpolate the price here. So food dot price. And then we'll use what Natalie has to actually give you, instead of 7.5, those actual numbers if it is a 0. So let's see what we can do. Okay. So this is a really good example. So let's say that you Google this, and this is the results that they give you, but you actually don't copy and paste that inside of your code, right? Because that doesn't work for your case. It works for someone else's case. So we actually need to have this a little bit differently for us to use in our case. So how this works is that this actually rounds it up into different decimal places. So we actually need this ending portion here. So dot round 2 decimal places, and also this front part here. This total cost, we don't have a total cost, so that would give you an error. So that is what we would do if you do find something like that. You have to change it to your individual use case.
Sorry, I looked away for like 1 second. Where did you get that from?
From Slack, and she got it from online. Is that correct?
Oh, okay, thanks.
Yep. Sweet. So now let's go ahead and try this out. Again, test as you go. We'll do order 1 equals main dish dot new, and it'll be nice if you can do it all in one go, but we're not that far ahead yet. But then we'll do order 1 dot display menu. What I would do for this to be better is that inside of the initialize method, I call display menus just straight off the bat. Okay, let's go ahead and run this. And let me Slack this out for those of you that need it. So let's go ahead and run this with ruby.mainDish. It looks like I have a syntax error. Nice. I think it's with the map. That's what it's. I think with map it should be curly braces instead of parentheses, most likely. Let's try that. Let's change this into curly braces, see if that works. And if it does, then I'll send this out. I'm confused. At main dishes equal new array of objects. Okay. And I'm pretty sure I'm using map correctly. But let me double check. You should all be getting an error, by the way. Okay. Yeah, everything looks good. sees what I'm doing wrong, go ahead and shout it out.
After the method name, do you need to put do?
Not quite. Okay, undefined method of that. Dishes. Because this is a instance variable. I'm wondering if it's because it's outside of the initialize, it doesn't know what it is. Oh, so I'm gonna bring this down into into this scope. It might be a scoping issue, so there might be a better place to put this. So I'm just testing this out still. See if this logic still works. It looks like undefined method for that. I see. So now the problem is because I'm calling it like a object, I'm calling it like a class instead of a hash. It should be like this. So instead of dot price and dot name, it should be colon price and colon name. See if that works. Awesome. And it does. So yeah, I think there is some scoping issue when we did the method calls like that. So yeah, there might be a better place to put that either in the initialize method, which we don't have yet. But for now, I'll just put it in the same exact place for here. Cool. But yeah, that should get you started on this assignment if you are doing the assignment. So any last questions before I let you all go early? Or I can actually put you all in a breakout room, whatever works best for you all for your project time, your homework time.